May the 5th, Cinco de Mayo, and we're thrilled you've joined us for this insight-packed hour. In honor of Cinco de Mayo, we are going to talk about WAN transformation. Insert groans here. That's what it says here on my script. So I'm Matt McDarby, your MC for today, and we're here to talk about building a business-centric WAN, right? Laying a foundation for future growth. And we have assembled an expert panel, a great crew of guests who I will introduce here momentarily. This conversation is sponsored by Silver Peak and Fidelus Technologies. You'll learn a little bit more about us as the conversation goes, but rather than have you listen to me, I will share just a couple of quick logistics, and then I'm going to give the floor to some of our very capable panelists. Quickly, just so you know who they are, we've got Chris DeHoust. He is the Director of Technical Sales for Silver Peak. Craig Sanford, System Engineering Manager. He is right up the road from me. I'm talking to you from Washington, D.C. Craig is in the Baltimore area. Chris in New York. Also in New York, Josh Reinman, Chief Technology Officer from Fidelus. And Michael Andrella, who's our Director of Network Professional Services. Welcome all. Chris, I'm going to bring you in a moment, but let me just let everyone know, all attendees, a few things. We will be distributing a link so that you can download your Chipotle lunch gift card in honor of Cinco de Mayo. We want everybody to have a sumptuous lunch from Chipotle, and those will be distributed shortly. We will also, at the end of the event, for those who can stick with us through the end and fill out a survey, there is another wonderful, fun, and exciting prize for all who can stick with us and give us feedback on today's event. So, last point before I give the floor to the panel is we're going to reserve some time toward the end to take some of your questions. There is a chat function here on this Zoom webinar. And if you have questions you'd like to ask the panel, please go ahead and put those questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can in, say, the last 10 to 15 minutes of today's session. So, take a breath. Let's bring in Chris. I'm going to put you on the spot, and I'm going to ask you to get us started and just kick off the conversation and talk about, why are people today interested in SD-WAN, and why is it so important we're having this conversation today about using SD-WAN for the purposes of digital transformation and building a foundation for the future? Can you tell us about that?
Sure, thanks. So Greg, if you could advance the slides for him. Thank you, sir. So, high level, there's a lot of reasons organizations have started their journey to transform to software-defined everything, particularly wide area networking in this case. And it varies from organization and industry, and even, what the future state or the future vision of an organization might be. But these are some high level things that we see are critical points. Maybe one of them is the key factor in decision-making move towards SD-WAN, or maybe they're all in play. I'm just walking through them quickly. I think first and foremost, there's an operational and a capital savings in play when you start talking about software defined. It might be realized short term, it might be realized long term. This could be perceived by the simple, math of circuit changing return on investment, or it could be perceived as like an operational savings more generally, in the way that you might be able to automate more of your organization and save costs that way. So automation plays in. There's a cost savings wrapper around it, and then there's also a value to an organization wrapper around it. Along those lines, at the same time, both along in terms of automation, where I think simplicity is belied in that point, and cost savings is also the concept of moving to SD-WAN to avoid infrastructure sprawl. And sprawl is not the right word. We're already sprawled. Most branch or edge infrastructures have individual line item network appliances to do everything you see on the screen: routers, firewalls, optimization, and everything in between. So if you can bring forward a a solution that serves multiple purposes in one shot, you minimize that sprawl, you simplify your operational model, and you save capital at the same time. And in that concept, reading bottom to top is also a simplification of the architecture that you're working with. So these are just good touch points about why people are moving to SD-WAN. And, I think Josh can go into a little bit about what he's seen individual customers do.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. So we're going to jump right into what the real world what the solution can do for you in the real world. We have 3 examples here of firms that we can't name by name, but they are clients of ours who we've done some work for. Each one has had a different reason for looking into SD-WAN, and as we discussed it with them, Silver Peak was the natural choice. It's our go-to partner in that area. So the first one, a global tax firm, you can see they have a good number of sites, pretty good sized organization with 1,500 employees. For them, especially being an accounting firm, they're always looking to maximize their dollars and make sure they're getting the best deal possible. Part of that involves a lot of real estate moves. When you're doing real estate moves, of course, there can be logistical challenges that come into play, one of which, from a technology standpoint, is getting the site connected. In the more traditional world, you have more expensive circuits, such as MPLS, that often have longer lead times and involve a bit more complexity to bring up, making sure it fits into your network properly. Until those circuits are available at the site, you really can't make the site operational. In addition to those challenges being there inherently, the other thing is there are delays that are likely to happen. We just had a different client who was having a simple circuit installed by a major carrier, and it took 6 months. These types of things do happen, albeit a bit extreme. With the addition of Silver Peak into their network, it removes a lot of those barriers and gets rid of some of those additional hurdles or considerations with regards to logistics. So all you need is a simple internet circuit, ideally multiple internet circuits. And what that'll do is it'll afford you the ability to have lower cost circuits that can be utilized in the same way that a private line can. And you remove some of those logistical challenges that I just mentioned. In addition to that, of course, you get the cost savings that come along with simply not having as expensive circuit that you have to maintain over time. So it really does make the process a lot easier. With the second column there, the major US law firm, from a networking standpoint, they're a very large organization, 65 sites, good number of employees. They've experienced upwards of 100 network outages a year, even with a dual MPLS WAN. So think about that. You're paying for this extreme, very expensive network, and you're paying for it twice because you want to have a backup. Oftentimes, these MPLS networks end up going active passive, so you're paying twice for only using one circuit at a time. In addition to that, when you're paying for that, you expect things to stay up with a reasonable amount of uptime. And when doing things like this, you're also then tied to specific carriers, right? So you're seeing the challenges kind of continue to compound upon themselves. Challenges with having the same carrier or requiring the same carrier rather is, what if you go into a market that the carrier doesn't support? How do you incorporate them? Turning over to a new carrier, should you decide to, is a massive undertaking because now you have 65 plus sites that you then need to re-provision. Well, when you go into something like Silver Peak and SD-WAN in general, again, you can eliminate one or both of those MPLS networks. You can provide the same, in this case, better uptime, ideally, because your circuits are going to become more resilient. And you're no longer tied to the same carrier, right? So as you continue to expand your operations into different markets, different cities, you no longer have to worry about that particular carrier being available there. In addition to that, whichever carrier is great today may not be great tomorrow, whether it's through a change in their operations or some sort of change in, due to a merger and acquisition, right? They take over a different carrier or get taken over themselves, and all of a sudden things maybe aren't working as well as they used to. Having that independence becomes really, really beneficial to a firm's agility and ability to continue surviving in the future. The last one is another law firm that we've worked with. They are a bit smaller of a firm, but their use case really focuses around, poor quality on the network, not necessarily full outages, but poor quality. And they're also a technology forward firm, right? They want to be on the leading edge in a safe way to ensure that they're taking advantage of the most efficient technology out there. So again, this firm had 2 MPLS networks similar to the second column there. And they were able to, as a part of their implementation of Silver Peak, get rid of one of those MPLS networks, which again was sitting idle, waiting for a failure of the primary. And they now have a solution that is not only forward thinking, because it brings upon the ability to be more agile with their network, but it also, because of the technology behind Silver Peak, in terms of path conditioning and QoS functionality and all the other goodies that come with it, they're no longer experiencing the same degraded quality on those networks. So all 3 of these firms had successful deployments. We were able to not only solve the issues that they brought to us that they were having, we were able to then bring them forward a bit further. So one of the great things about all these solutions that all these firms continue to realize is their operational capacity increases, right? They become much more efficient. So a study was done in 2018 that states that 60% of an IT organization's time is spent keeping the lights on. So if you think about that, your IT budget, your personnel, 60% of that money is going towards just maintaining status quo, not moving the firm forward. Implementing things such as SD-WAN requires less effort to operate and allows you to repurpose your engineering team, right? These are highly skilled professionals. It allows you to repurpose these folks to focus on moving the firm forward and possibly become better aligned with the revenue generation portion of the organization. An ideal IT organization goes unnoticed by its end users because issues don't come up. And that's what we tend to get out of Silver Peak. So, that covers the technology side of it. But one of the other pieces which I want to highlight, and I want to bring in Mike Andrella, again, our Director of Network Services, to kind of discuss the human side of it, right? So there is the technology side, but we also want to discuss how these projects go about. So, Mike, as you were going through the projects with these organizations, I understand some of the engineers on their side have been a bit nervous deploying new technology, which many people often are. What can you tell us about your peers at our client firms going into this project? How'd they feel about it? And even tell us a little more about what you did to help them along with it.
Yeah, sure, Josh. I think that most are pretty skeptical, if they haven't done any research about SD-WAN and the advantages. They really like to challenge it, whether it's in the pre-sale meetings or, during the deployment. I find that a lot of the guys like to challenge certain elements of the design of the technology to see if they could poke holes in it. I think there's also an impression that the integration is really complex. Probably, most of that stemming from older SD-WAN products, that are no longer around.
Thanks. That's helpful. The start of a project can be really important to having the project become successful, and like you said, part of that is easing their mind a bit. What are some of the things you did to help them become more comfortable, not just with the solution, but also with Fidelus and everything that our partnership with Silver Peak brings to the table?
Yeah, I really feel like those initial meetings are where you can really get in front of that if you do the right thing. The most helpful exercise to do is a really deep dive on the existing setup. All the physical connection points, the routing protocols that are in place, the failover that's in place. And once you have that all mapped out and everybody can see it visually, then you can really start to overlay some of the different integration options, including all those failure scenarios. And people, once they see it, once they see the physical representation of it, it becomes an easier discussion, especially because there's so much flexibility in integration. You really can do anything with this. There's no restrictions on placement in the network. And yet we really try to keep things as simple as possible using, using some of the templates that we have, and, really trying to keep away from, a lot of manipulation with any of the protocols that are going on.
Awesome. Thank you. And then the last thing I think is really the proof in the pudding is deploying this stuff, especially when you're just putting things in new, things can seem to go well. And one of the things I've certainly experienced as the client side of things is what happens 6 months down the road. How do things continue to hold up? And you've kept up with your peers at these organizations.
Oh yeah.
What's been their sentiment, after deployment, things are working and operational?
I mean, it's been overwhelmingly positive. No one's ever sent one back. So, even the people that we don't hear from that frequently are pretty happy with it. Again, I think the key is in the communication, the instruction, regular status meetings, QA sessions, detailed diagrams that serve as, key points for understanding and troubleshooting. Communication. I think that the monitor, the orchestrator, the way it presents the information is just absolutely fantastic. I think people are surprised about how intuitive the platform is, how easy it is to pull the information out of Orchestrator without even necessarily knowing, where the drill down is. You type it in a search, you want to look at routes, you want to look at overlays, you want to look at the health map, quick search, the information comes up, and it sticks to the platform until you decide to close that window. So it's just been a fantastic product, in terms of the deployment, in terms of the ongoing maintenance, in terms of the performance. I think probably the biggest issue that people have with it, the only issue that people really have with it that I've heard of, is that they don't know when a circuit goes down, unless they have a really robust monitoring platform. While you can tell when a circuit goes down easy enough, when the circuit is, running a little bit dirty, it's, in traditional platform, that's tough to see. But, you look at it from the orchestrator and it's pretty clear what it is and what needs to be done.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. And, to that point, the end users don't know, right, that the circuit goes down. Hopefully your team is doing a good enough job of keeping an eye on things that at least they'll understand when a circuit goes down. And for anyone who doesn't want to take on the operations of the new solution, or just simply wants to focus elsewhere, there are managed services solutions available as well. Fidelus offers one of them. So we just covered a lot, and I want to now move it off to Craig, who's going to take us through a little bit of the architecture that makes up the components to provide the solution we just spoke about.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Josh. So as Mike mentioned about the orchestrator, that is one of, and really the key portion of our offering. So Silver Peak is a software company. We have two main software offerings. We have our orchestrator, which it acts as central management for pre-provisioning, deploying, operating, monitoring, upgrading, troubleshooting. Everything on the platform can and generally should be done through Orchestrator. That can be hosted in a customer on-premise environment, in their cloud IaaS deployment, or Silver Peak offers it as a service as well. If you want to monitor and manage one less thing, we can host the orchestrator on the customer behalf. Customer still has full control of all of the configuration. They just don't have to worry about backups and upgrades. Just tell us to do it and we'll handle it. So we build out all of these business-driven policies. You may hear us use the term business intent overlays or overlays throughout. It's all of how we want the WAN to operate. Build it out in Orchestrator, design it, and then it pushes, Orchestrator pushes those policies down to all of the appliances. And that's the second portion of software that we have. It's our Edge OS platform that can run on our physical appliances. We are a software company predominantly, but some customers say it's a lot easier to have you install the operating system on your own hardware. It's easier for us to plug in cables to a physical appliance that you can provide rather than going to some other hardware vendor. If strategically it makes more sense for our customer to deploy us as a VM on top of some other hardware and virtualization platform, great, we can do that. If you need to deploy into the cloud, we are in the marketplace of all the 4 major vendors, and you'll see that list on a later slide. Whether you deploy on a physical appliance, a virtual appliance in the cloud, it's all a single piece of software. So you get all of the same features and benefits, and in general, the same performance. The physical boxes can go a little bit higher, as you would expect of having dedicated metal for it, but it's all of the same feature set across. And that comes back to what Mike was saying around simplicity and ease of operation and continuity, that if you need to make a change 3 months after you deploy, You do that through Orchestrator. Orchestrator pushes that update to all the appliances. So it's not a massive rollout plan. It's configure in one location and push to many. For those that aren't familiar, our legacy as a company is in WAN optimization. So we've been working with customers around WAN transformation for our entire history as a company. The first 10 years spent as purely WAN optimization. And that's still available. Some customers still need it. Most customers still need it for certain applications. And you have that flexibility through the Boost WAN optimization. So it is still there. Some people ask, do I need WAN opt with SD-WAN? The answer is so many things are in IT is maybe. And we're very comfortable with having those conversations of which applications need and don't need WAN optimization. So with that, I want to have Chris give a little more deeper dive into what the actual features of the platform are.
Sure. Thanks, Craig. So, this is a good snapshot of what's on the truck, so to speak. Obviously, it's not exhaustive, but we tailored it for the use case of just discussing primary functions that customers are either currently adopting, looking to adopt going forward, and really what you can do with a true thin edge or SD-WAN branch edge platform. So, the Orchestrator, as Craig mentioned before, is that centralized manager, monitor, controller. If you look at how we offer up the appliance licensing, it's really all inclusive. As Craig mentioned before, we come from WAN ops, so obviously WAN op would be something separate that you can license over and above what you see on the screen. But let's just focus on what's here. We do have a lot of customers who talk about router replacement, and that could be an edge router or a branch core equivalent router, depending on how they consume their WAN circuits. So in that case, it's very frequent to see the use case of, your standard dynamic routing protocols, BGP, OSPF. Frequently VRFs come into that space as well for the larger organizations. Clearly the financials and security-minded organizations, or M&A, always look at segmentation as being part of it. So that might be a drill-in. But you might not need it. So where would you not need it? Well, a lot of our retail organizations aren't necessarily concerned about VRFs, but they want segmentation. The segmentation they want is a security-oriented approach. And there they'd be looking to, let's say, the LAN side to leverage the zone-based firewall functionality in the product. So this gives you a nice cross-section of what organizations see as key features in an edge platform when you're talking about software-defined. And in particular, just call out that the router replacement's one, the security replacement and zone-based firewall is another. Of course, it can be enhanced with integrations to third-party tools and next-gen firewalls. But then over and above that, if you notice, you even had things like network analytics coming in. It's all well and good to talk about the wonderful fanfare of SD-WAN and what it can do for your applications and aggregation. All that's well and good. But if you can't get the network analytics out of it, if you can't see why your traffic steering the way it is, or if the carriers are meeting the SLAs, or even if it's the network that's the problem or not, if you need another tool for that and you have to learn yet another system for that or integrate it, it adds another degree of complexity, which we talked about earlier, is something we're trying to pull out of a branch, not add into it. So having something like network analytics just built into the product and being fully featured and robust, whether you want to use it directly or integrate it with a third-party tool, is a nice bolt-on here that's just part of the system. And finally, we'll get to it later, but in here, and it sort of masks the concept of ecosystem integration. Silver Peak focus on one thing only, and we do it well, and that's WAN transformation. I mean, that's what we do. Yes, we have a firewall. Is it, a next-gen firewall? No, absolutely not. And yes, we have a full routing stack. But is it going to be something that's going to, act as a complete replacement for all of your next-gen firewall functionality and the way that you might be routing in and out of the cloud? No. So that's where we have an ecosystem that really helps best of breed when you take traffic off of the edge and out into the wild, so to speak, of the WAN. So that's kind of the high level from the solution standpoint. I was going to ask Mike and Josh to kind of talk about some of the real world advantages that they see.
Sorry about that. Mute button was getting to me. Yeah, so there, we've already spoken a lot about these particular features here, some of which I think are important to highlight. One is the intelligence of the platform. I'm going to ask Mike to jump in on some of the specifics, but the reason that the solution is able to make the network appear to always be up from the end user standpoint is due to its intelligence, right? It's able to constantly monitor the conditions of the network. And Mike, can you just give us one example of one of the things that Silver Peak does really well with regards to intelligence?
Yeah, I think that, the router displacement really resonated with me because I feel like early on we saw a lot of those. People were looking to, refresh their existing routers, then the question came up, of course, well, do I really still need the router? The problem with the traditional router is it routes based on the existence of a route. And that's fine. You can get it to do other things, using router-based features like IPSLA and use that to measure certain characteristics. But, SD-WAN, that's what it does by default. It's making decisions based on a route plus what's the path characteristics? What does my loss look like? What does my latency look like? What does my jitter look like? How are my MOS scores doing? It's taking all of this into account in its pathing decisions. And like I said, even when the circuit is not running great, it's still able to make up for a significant percentage of loss that you would see during a brownout situation. So, it's truly way more intelligent than a router.
Thanks, Mike. So the next couple of points I think are actually really good to group together. So what I like about security, agility, and even flexibility is they all have technical components to it, but really when you bring it together, it all works towards a business requirement, right? Security is number one on everyone's list today, and it's no longer, and hasn't been for a few years now, a technical requirement. It's now paramount to running a successful business, ensuring that your data, your client's data, and everything around that is safe at home. Silver Peak's always staying on top of the latest security requirements out there, ensuring that the capabilities of the transmissions are always secure, ensuring the boxes themselves, the appliances are hardened. It really is just the underlying factor of any solution you get today, especially those that are going to see pretty much all of your data. It's a very important piece to make sure you get right. With regards to agility and flexibility, going back to what I mentioned earlier, that one client, the tax firm, speaking to their constant real estate moves, always looking to make the most efficient use of their financial resources. The ability to bring up a new office very quickly is huge. Think about the amount of rent that you pay when that office is operational. You're also paying that before you move in, right? So that's a big thing to consider. When you think about things like Hurricane Sandy, right? We're a few years past that at this point. Unfortunately, we've got a larger world issue to deal with. But in situations like Hurricane Sandy or other major disasters, the ability to bring up a temporary office quickly, right, by whatever means necessary, even if it's a basic broadband connection, it can be done very, very quickly because Silver Peak is easy to deploy and really just bring up over any type of circuit. You can even bring it up over cell signals, 5G. Hopefully that's coming to most markets now. 4G certainly. Really, the limits are pretty minimal in terms of where you can't bring it up. Construction sites, right? All these places that are usually pretty slim on technology, Silver Peak can live there really well. And with regards to enhanced performance, and application acceleration, again, the application acceleration is an older game. Like Chris mentioned earlier, it is one that they still do and one that a lot of organizations still require for certain applications. Mike, can you give us a little more in depth on the enhanced performance and app acceleration?
Oh yeah, that's a great one to mention. One that I feel like we meant to mention before but forgot about. The acceleration piece is not like the application accelerators of years past, right? Like there's no application specific optimizations going on. So really what you're left with is something that doesn't break the applications that it was meant to accelerate. That was a huge problem with, some competing technologies back in the day who I won't mention. There are many. It's a generic optimizer, which works fantastic. And again, along that same model of flexibility, it's not tied to a site. It's not tied to an appliance. It's basically your pool that you distribute as you see fit. And if you find that some sites need more than others throughout the year, or as sites grow or shrink, you can add or take it away as well. So it's a really, Silver Peak had a fantastic application accelerator back in the day as well. And basically they've taken that same technology, baked it into the SD-WAN appliance in a much simpler and a much more flexible deployment.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. So next, I think it's now a good time to go into some of one of the biggest questions out there is, how can I run these highly sensitive applications over the internet, right? We know we can all do it through dedicated circuits, pay extra for a good QoS and all that good stuff. But one of the advantages is you can now do this all over the internet. So Craig, can you bring us to the next slide and give us some insight as to how well that works?
Yeah, sure. So, I think kind of back to what Mike said earlier around some of the initial meetings that we're in with customers and prospects all the time, of pushing back on if SD-WAN can really deliver on everything that we and other vendors say that it can. One of the major areas is on voice, and specifically running VoIP over the internet. And this is a graph from a third-party study that we participated in, asking them to evaluate what one of our features, path conditioning, can do for lossy links. Doesn't matter if it's internet or MPLS or dark fiber, but of course we're going to see more loss on the internet. So this is where it's most applicable. So here you see why it gets brought up all the time, and why a lot of time VoIP will break over the internet is that as soon as you see a 0.5% loss or so, the voice quality noticeably degrades and you'll start getting complaints. And at 1.75% loss, you start seeing call fail. And this is for a single link with no path conditioning. So this is your traditional DMVPN setup, what everybody's tested over time of trying to run this. This is why it doesn't work, because we'd expect probably around 1% loss on average over internet links. So it's just can't work during normal operating conditions. And if things degrade, it fails miserably. And this is why it's important, and you need to understand the nuances of different SD-WAN offerings, because we can solve this with our path conditioning. So what it does is it adds extra packets onto the wire, even if it's a single link, so that we can correct for that loss, improve that provider performance, so that the users don't notice and can fully function over a single internet broadband link, right? This is the difference between having a vendor say, yeah, you can run voice over internet, but you have to have DIA, or being able to run it over broadband, which we do with a lot of our customer set. So the path conditioning extends out the quality of voice calls a lot, over a lot higher loss. So 4 times longer that you can maintain a good quality of experience before it starts dropping off. If you have enough loss on the wire, yes, you're going to have poor quality over the internet or over any circuit, but we can maintain it over and above what the average provider is going to have, so that you can run your business. We have call centers that are running over this. We have law firms that are doing depositions over the internet, that you can run this for a long period of time and be successful and not have user complaints while using broadband and VoIP in combination. And then, if you have multiple links, then that's where we can really perform well over a long period of time, up to 20% loss, where you can still have high quality, toll quality voice calls going over highly lossy links. So that is probably the biggest pushback that we received during those early calls, of saying, in engagements with customers and prospects, of saying, what about voice? How do you handle voice? So I just want to take that extra minute to go into that. And now hand it back to Chris for a second to talk about the ecosystem he made mention of earlier.
Great, thanks, Craig. And then I'm just going to kind of go through this quickly because we're coming up on time. So I mean, it's important to realize, again, we said it before, and both Craig and I have reiterated it, that we really focus on WAN transformation. It's just the mindset and the mentality of the company. We'd rather do things, 2 or 3 things extremely well, and rely on partners and an ecosystem who have a similar mindset, or at least a division of the organization with a similar mindset. So as you look out into SD-WAN vendors, you'll see there are quite a few of them that try and do and be everything to everyone in terms of feature function. And while we try and check a lot of boxes in those spaces where we see clearly that there are market leaders doing it better than us, or that there are visions of connectivity and a networking and data center and enterprise infrastructure that require more than just a single point solution, we build strong partner ecosystem relationships. And we call it the App Store because at the end of the day, we try and take the same concept of simplicity and automation and drive it into the product. So a really strong example is what we do with, let's say, a Zscaler checkpoint in Azure and AWS. I mean, there's actually menu features in our product and drag and drop point and click connectivity into these offerings. You know, those are clear points where there's a backend DevOps or API infrastructure that we lean on, and we just have the two products with a little bit of drag and drop and a touch of licensing, you know, information from them, connect and build a policy or an intent that can be shared both across the SD-WAN and then drive traffic either into a security or cloud-based infrastructure. On the application front, you know, being part of Office 365 and certified by Microsoft is critical. Fidelus offers their own product, which they're going to talk about momentarily. And then as you tier down, you can see we're talking big picture down to specific applications, and you get to the infrastructure side. Obviously, there's a lot that can be done with some of the major players in the infrastructure space. And if you really go to the edges, the UCPE space, which I and Craig both do a lot with. And then finally, analytics, because while we do offer analytics, there are obviously analytics engines that are critical to an organization, and being part and parcel with them and having a strong ecosystem relationship is key to not just integration of the product, but successful integration of the product. So I'm going to pass this off to Josh now to talk a little bit about what Fidelus does, and then we'll wrap it up pretty quickly after that.
Thanks, Chris. So on the next slide, I want to highlight our latest solution that Fidelus is offering is unified communications as a service. In addition to doing networking services, Fidelus is well known for our unified communications offering. We are doing unified communications as a service. It is in the cloud, hosted by Fidelus along with our partner. And the solution itself is offering calling, video, messaging, presence, voicemail, web collaboration, all the things you would think that go along with unified communications. It's paired with a white glove service, so we want to make sure every one of our clients is getting the top tier level of service to ensure they're operating at their best. And it's all managed by a single pane of glass, so we want to make sure it's easy to use as well. Of course, security is paramount, again, as I mentioned earlier, to any solution that we put out there. Telephony and collaboration is a critical business function, so we're finding it's one of the last pieces that may end up moving to the cloud because it's so sensitive to traffic, right? As was just gone over in the last few slides, traffic reliability, not just with making sure the packets get there, but also making sure they get there in a timely manner, is huge. While there are services out there that do pure internet-based solutions, their quality is very much suspect, and is very much relied rather on all the circuits that are in between. As we just went over, there can be a higher rate of packet loss on those. So Fidelus, not only are we a partner of Silver Peak, we use it ourselves. We don't have any private WAN connections ourselves. We only use Silver Peak, and our UCaaS solution is underpinned by Silver Peak. All the connectivity that comes into us from our clients is run by Silver Peak, and that's the beauty of it. Is this solution is a very complex network, and being able to bring Silver Peak into it and have that as our connectivity makes it easier to turn up a client, makes it faster to bring you on board, provides the security that you would expect, and simplifies the WAN edge aspect of it. So all around, we're able to provide a better level of service, both in the technology side and the people side, simply because we've partnered with Silver Peak on this solution. And the last piece, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier with some of our clients, is we can easily scale. So as your organization grows, as the needs grow, it's not going to be a wholesale redeployment of anything. We can easily just add appliances to make the solution more robust. And that's, that's the big thing for us, is we want to make sure this is easy to consume. So unified communications in the cloud is, again, something that companies might be a little hesitant to go into because of quality concerns. Silver Peak makes that concern go away. Chris, can you get into a little more maybe about some of the security partnerships that are out there?
Sure. So, I mean, I spoke to it a little earlier, so just to quickly gloss over it one more time. Yeah, this is really where most of software-defined networking is going to land. Probably not in 2020 across the board, but clearly you can see the beginnings of this. And the inspiration around it is just, again, drag and drop connectivity to the product of your choice. It's supposed to be, a best-in-breed mentality. So reading on the screen, it's as simple as you have an orchestrator, you drag and drop a particular item, let's say CloudGuard from Checkpoint or Zscaler, which is focused on security. And all of that connectivity, all the policy, all the intent is just immediately connected. The APIs have a communication, the end users and the network ops teams are not even involved. It's simply a quick change, but it's spread across the entire organization as policy allows. And this is just a massive shift from what we've done in the past, where a similar event without the API integration, without the drag and drop, would be countless changes, manual configuration on both sides, obviously allowing both for error and incorrect changes, and also just a lot of overhead, management complexity, operational complexity. So this is sort of where we're going, not just Silver Peak, but the industry as a whole. And it's a good representation of the power of looking to a software-defined approach. And then I'll pass this over to Craig for one last run through, and I think we'll be moving to questions right after that.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. So, speaking of where we see things moving, a lot of our conversations right now are talking about cloud presence and IaaS, SaaS, PaaS offerings of various providers you see here and others. A lot of customers dip their toe in the water into one of these providers, and then all of a sudden may have found themselves neck deep in it and without really a plan of how they got there or how to get out, or maybe need to move providers. So there's a lot of things and considerations when talking about just a single IaaS provider, of saying within AWS, if you have a lot of VPCs over a lot of different regions, how do you tie that into your on-premise branches and on-prem data center? And then if you're thinking about moving between cloud vendors, how do you tie all that together easily? We have a great way to be able to do that with our Edge Connect appliances in the different cloud providers and tying them into those branch locations, tying them back to them. So if that's something that your organization is considering, we'd love to have that follow-up conversation of how to actually achieve it and what it looks like, because as Mike said earlier, a lot of it is around the initial planning, discussions, and discovery, and making sure that we understand where you are and where you want to get to, and then we help you through that, help step through that entire path. So, just as one last example of that with the cloud, there's a lot of different ways of even getting that connectivity, whether you want to go private line with an express router, direct connect, or other, whether you want to just use the internet, or whether you need the performance benefits of WAN optimization and doing Edge Connect bookended. So this matrix of offerings and considerations gets busy quickly, and we can help you discuss the different options and figure out what's best for your organization. So with that, first, thank you for listening. And now I think it's time to hand it back to Matt for some Q&A.
Yes, it is. Yeah, thank you, Craig. Well done, panel. Just to let you know that everybody who was with us at the start is still with us. I know that might have something to do with our promise of lunch and a fun and exciting prize at the end. But just a quick comment on lunch. Check your email if you're a participant on today's session. Your digital Chipotle gift card should be in your inbox. If you don't see it, please look for it. We live up to our word, right? We promised you lunch, and we're going to deliver on that. So Okay, we do have some questions that have come through by way of chat. I will ask the team, and I'm just going to kind of leave it to the panel to, whoever wants to jump at these can attack them. So the first question, can we expect performance gains with SD-WAN? And if so, what type of performance gains would we see?
Sure, I can take. There we go.
So just as a heads up, I've allowed everybody to talk who's attended. Most of you might be muted already, so you would have to unmute yourselves in order to speak. But as opposed to just being on the chat at this point during the Q&A, you can also just chime in. Now to answer the question about performance, Craig, please jump in. But even without SD-WAN, you're talking about leveraging internet and MPLS at the same time as a possibility historically. Once you add SD-WAN and some of the features that we talked about, I think you can clearly expect an increase in performance. It's a two-part or two-sided question in the sense that you're very frequently talking about moving from MPLS to broadband, maybe not just short-term, but long-term. So then the question is, well, have I sacrificed latency for cost? And while that's true, Craig went through that you can maintain total quality performance even over, let's say, a lossy link, but latency is still in play. That doesn't really change. So it's a roundabout way of saying that you should be able to expect that critical apps performance are at minimum maintained. And if there's a question about, throughput, then clearly, assuming that you're adding new circuits or you're load balancing packet by packet, you can see increased performance on that side. So latency always plays in as a question, and we have ways to address it with our legacy WAN up. Throughput, you can almost assuredly see an increase, and you won't see a degradation regardless with some of the tech that we bring into play. And Craig, I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that.
I think that was a pretty good summary.
Okay, all right. I'm going to allow for some silence in case anyone is on the live line and wants to be so bold as to ask a question. Otherwise, I've got a few others teed up in chat, so I'll be quiet for a moment. Any questions from our audience? Okay. All right, so let me, looking at other questions in the chat. This one's about implementation, turning up a branch site. What type of effort goes into turning up a branch site? Who wants to take that one?
I could take that one, Matt. This is Mike.
Sure.
Everybody.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so I mean, typically in our deployments, we don't turn up a branch. We'll turn up a set of branches. Maybe 10, maybe 20, maybe even 30. A lot of the prep that goes into that, allows for that to take place. But we can also do a single branch too. And if we were to look at a single branch turn up, really the first question is, is it are we keeping the old infrastructure in play as well as some sort of backup path, or are we just keeping the Silver Peak in there? So really, I find that most cases, people still want to leverage that underlying infrastructure in the event that something does happen, especially for those smaller sites that don't necessarily warrant the expenditure of redundant Silver Peak appliances. So, assuming that that's the kind of case that we're talking about here, the turn up is actually pretty straightforward. The appliance goes to the site, it's plugged in, it gets an IP, it communicates with Orchestrator, which, if it's pre-configured, pulls down its config, put a little bit more on there, get it ready, prep the switch to be able to communicate with it, make sure that the tunnels to the data centers are up before bringing anything online. Maybe even do a quick health check of the existing stuff just to make sure there's no underlying issues there that could potentially get us later. Once that's done, we're sure that the existing network is healthy, we're sure that our tunnels are up and error-free. Then it's just a matter of cutting over, and cutting over really, at least in our designs, is just a matter of activating whatever that mechanism is, whether it's BGP, whether it's OSPF, could be static routes tied to SLA. Again, we have a lot of flexibility in how we can do that. And it really does depend on what that remote office equipment supports. Does that answer that question?
I think it does.
Okay.
Chris?
I'm trying to generalize as best I can.
Yeah,
You know, that's the most common deployment that we're seeing these days.
Yeah. Chris, Craig, Josh, would you add anything? Anything else to add to Mike's answer?
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add is one of the things I really love about Silver Peak is it really helps to ensure that you keep standardization across your organization. Right? I bet anyone out there who goes to survey all of their devices, there's probably a good chance that different code is running on them. Maybe you've got slightly different configurations. I think it's just the nature of the business that we do and the complexity of the work that we have. And using something like Silver Peak makes not only keeping all of that in line, so you've got great consistency, but it means that deploying a new site, you automatically know it's just going to follow those standards and you don't have to worry about it in the same way.
Yeah, very good point, Josh.
Okay. All right, it looks like we've got time to take one more question. We've got a good one from Stefan. In light of the global pandemic and tons of remote workers, is there enough granularity in the product to enhance the remote user experience over SSL VPN?
Chris, did you plant this question?
No, I didn't. I write on those and build those.
Exactly. I'll start, but Chris, Chris authored a blog, which is why I'm teasing him about this. I'm pretty much around this topic, so I'll start, but I'm sure he'll have a few comments to add. So, the use cases are all different, and I'll bring it back to voice and the difference between a power user, I guess, at an organization and a generic user, right? So at Silver Peak, I would consider myself a generic user. For the most part, the things that I access are SaaS applications where it doesn't matter if I'm at an office or at my home office or in a coffee shop, right? I'm just going out to a SaaS app and things can work pretty well. Where we really see our product shine is with the power users of saying, if you need to run your call center agents out of their home office, then they need the path conditioning that our product can provide because they're probably only going to have a single broadband connection. And one of our customers, there's another write-up on this, they deployed 400 sites, home sites in 10 days because they had to shut down their call centers. Right, so you had to make it easy to deploy. Coming back to the question of what's it like to turn up a site, we had to make it easy to deploy so that a non-IT person could just plug it into their home setup without knowing what that home setup is when we're writing the instructions, and join the SD-WAN fabric. Other examples of saying software code development, where every time you make a change, you may need to recompile code, and you don't know necessarily where that compiling is going to happen. So a lot of data being sent back and forth, where WAN optimization and taking data off the wire becomes important again. So in those cases, absolutely, it makes sense to have an Edge Connect appliance at the home office locations. Now, if it comes back to the standard user that I describe myself as, then it may make sense to use a different type of connection like an SSL VPN and leverage cloud connectivity to do that. And Chris, if you want to take it from there.
Yeah, sure. That's really well put, Greg. And I'll just tie it in. So, like Craig pointed, at the end of the day, we're not geared to enhance an SSL VPN because we're not a client on an instance. So, the power users, or on a laptop or your work from home machine, the power users make a lot of sense to have a Silver Peak on premise. They're tiny, they're small, they're the size of 2 iPhones stacked together for the remote home worker. In the SSL VPN case, the argument that I put forward was basically, if you have a need to get users onto to a particular on-premise or in the cloud, and I don't mean SaaS, I mean IaaS, in the cloud data store or data flow, if that's somehow part of their work, then getting an SSL VPN directly connected as close as possible to a meet-me point in the cloud, and then riding a high-performance backbone makes a lot of sense. So the argument is simple as, if there is a type of user or a type of workflow where an SSL VPN home running all the way back to that site is just not sufficient enough to get a quality of performance for that end user, then what we would recommend, and I think this is just generically, is get them to the nearest SSL VPN endpoint they can get to, and let's say the cloud, for instance, and then ride an SD-WAN high performance backbone from there. So, me here in in the New York area, I can connect to the, let's say, cloud instances down Azure and AWS both reside in Virginia. I can get on there with my SSL VPN. AWS makes one, obviously Microsoft does too. And that's like a 10 millisecond hop. And then I can ride an SD-WAN backbone back to Singapore, where I might be doing work and pulling data and take advantage of a much stronger and more resilient connection between Virginia and Singapore than if I were to just home run an SSL VPN all the way back there. So that's the logic. We've written up on this a few times. I think when you start piecing it together, you realize, just like Craig said before, it depends on the workflow and the user type. But there is a strong case, especially right now, to be made for that design and that architecture where it makes sense. And I think that's it.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, if you're in the audience, you might be thinking, what's next? Well, we'll tell you. It's pinata time, folks. It's Cinco de Mayo. We're not going to force you to watch us taking a whack at a virtual pinata or anything like that. But if you hang with us at the end of the session, when you close the Zoom window in a few minutes, you'll be taken to a survey. Fill out the survey. We will send you, or the pinata enthusiast in your home, a pinata filled with, as it says, joy. So right there in the pinata, full of joy. And then, of course, there's a time and a place, right? We'd love to have conversation. If you have a question or want more information, we'd love to have a follow-up discussion with any of the members of the panel or several of them. We can make that happen. Just let us know. There's a question on the survey where you can ask us to do that, and we will set that right up. So thank you all. Thank you, panel. Well done. Thank you, participants, for staying with us all the way through the end. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will speak with you soon.